Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon starts with a cool premise. The all-consuming Red Death, an extinction-level plague, so bad it led to a mass exodus, is coming back, and you're caught in the middle of it. As a designer, I was intrigued. I started thinking about how I would design a serious pathogen in the game, but I was also disappointed with how this RPG designed theirs, without grounding it in the realities of actual pandemics. I'm Lucas Olivieri, the creative director at Loreworx, a gaming startup, and this video is for your entertainment, not your education. But I will have all the sources linked in the description in case you're curious and you want to do your own research. But let's get into this world-eating disease.
And the Red Death has returned. Rulers of the island asylum, an order of the Red Priests, are desperate to stop it by any means necessary.
So here's how I approached this. I looked at every piece of lore that I could find in the game, I studied patients, and I played the game on the lookout for anything mentioning the Red Death, or outbreaks, or the plague in general. Then I studied real-world diseases and past pandemics so I could establish a reference. And the last step was to create a visual representation of this research. And to keep this related to video games, I went with spider charts because they work and they're cool. Each axis is an attribute. You plot the value on each axis and you connect dots and they form a shape. The bigger the shape is in a direction, the stronger that attribute, so you can compare things at a glance. I worked with 8 different attributes and 5 levels from the perspective of the disease. And so a 5 means that the disease is more powerful. You'll see what I mean. Let's start with the flu. The first attribute is incubation time, or how long until symptoms start. Longer incubation times can often make these pathogens more dangerous because depending on the pathogen, you can infect others while asymptomatic. The incubation time for the seasonal flu is on average 2 days, and you can get people sick before and after your symptoms. Now moving on to human-to-human transmissibility, also called or not. How many people will an infected person typically infect? And if you have the flu, you will likely pass it on to 1.2 to 1.8 other people. How you find 20% or 80% of a person is up to you. R naught is an important indicator of the potential spread of a disease. Another one is vector or reservoir amplification. If you remove humans from the equation, what are you left with? Animals and stuff, right? So what role do rats play in the spread of a pathogen? What about chickens or pigs or lice? Vectors, they carry the pathogen from one host and they inject it into another, kind of like mosquitoes. And reservoirs are animals or environmental hosts where the pathogen lives outside of humans. There's no insect vector for influenza, but there's a very large avian or swine reservoir that keeps reseeding new human strains of the virus. And then we have transmission ease. What's required for one person to infect another? If I sneeze from the other side of town, will you get sick or do we have to get funky under the sheets? You know, with flu, it's mostly respiratory. Think aerosolized droplets. A sneeze will absolutely do the trick. And if you do get it, how bad is it? Well, I heard a story from an ER doctor once. He said it was flu season and the ER was packed. And so he looked into the waiting room and he asked, who here thinks they have the flu? A bunch of people raised their hands. And then he asked, who thinks they have the cold? And then he went, okay, if you could raise your hand, you have a cold. The bottom line is that the flu will make you wish you had a cold. The symptoms are similar, but they tend to be a lot more intense. But now we have mutation rate. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you probably know how often the flu mutates. It's pretty goddamn often. That large animal reservoir plays a big part in you having to get your flu shot every single year. We got 2 more to go. Immunity duration or reinfection likelihood. The more a pathogen mutates, the higher the likelihood of reinfection. Getting reinfection with the flu in the same year, It's pretty common. And then when all is said and done, what is the case fatality ratio, the CFR for the science people? The percentage of people who die from the disease. And this is a tough one because the level of care can change so dramatically depending on where the patient lives. But with the flu, it is quite low. And there you have it. It's the spider chart for the influenza virus. Now here's one for the common cold, but I'm not going over it point by point. But you can see at a glance that it's similar to the flu, it's just not as bad. This one's the Ebola virus. This shit is no joke, with intense symptoms like severe weakness, profuse vomiting, diarrhea, and multi-organ involvement, leading to organ failure and septic shock. Like, it's all kinds of messed up, and it has an average fatality rate of 50%. You do not want Ebola in your life. But the Red Death is a pandemic in the game, and so let's look at a couple of real-world examples. We all went through the COVID-19 pandemic. I know how it affected my life, and you know how it affected yours. We had mask mandates, we had lockdowns, social distancing, working from home, all of this crap. What's interesting about this one is the vector reservoir score being so low for a pandemic that is typically associated with bats. But it's low like this because animal reservoirs may have been the origin, but they were not an amplifier for outbreaks. COVID-19 was mainly carried by human-to-human transmission, that R0 thing that we talked about. As bad as it was, though, it was nothing compared to the Black Death, the disease that inspired the Red Death. This was a bacterial pathogen believed to have originated from cemeteries located near Lake Issyk-Kul of modern-day Kyrgyzstan, spreading via trade and killing up to 60% of Europe's population in a pandemic that started in 1346 and ended in 1353. There were two major forms of the plague. Bubonic is the more popular version, but if the bacteria got into the lungs, it evolved into the fatal pneumonic form. The plague had an incubation time of 2 to 8 days with no asymptomatic spread. The bubonic form cannot be spread from human to human, but the rare pneumonic form can, which is why the R0 here disregards the bubonic form. But now for what I believe made this a catastrophic pandemic, the vector and reservoir amplification. Rats were the reservoir and fleas the vector. There were plenty of rats in populated areas in the 1300s, and when these rats died, the fleas looked for other beings to snack on, leading to many, many more infected. That means that killing rats was both good and bad. Bad because it forced fleas out of them, but good because in the long run, it reduced the reservoir. The plague is easy to transmit if the infected person has a pneumonic version, through close contact or aerosolized droplets. That is the rarer form though, so this attribute is lower than the flu, cold, or COVID. These symptoms though are no joke. It's fever, chills, headache, fatigue, and the infamous painful swelling of the lymph nodes with blackened skin around them. And if the infection overwhelms the bloodstream, the bubonic form gets labeled septicemic, basically means sepsis, and your chances of survival going down quite a bit. The pneumonic version comes with fever, headache, weakness, pneumonia with shortness of breath, chest pain, cough, and sometimes bloody or watery mucus. This one was fatal back then, and it's still fatal now if left untreated. Victims would die in just a few days. Bacteria tend to evolve slower than viruses though, so that's good. And then there's reinfection and immunity. Plague survivals often keep antibodies for years, but protection isn't guaranteed. Reinfections do happen, so I'm scoring immunity right in the middle. The population of Europe was about 80 million during the plague years. If up to 60% died, that's 48 million deaths. Those were desperate times, and desperate measures were used to try to contain the spread. Infected homes were sealed for weeks, doors were marked with a cross, and watchmen were posted. Bodies were moved to plague pits, often at night, to avoid adding to the panic and desperation. There were travel bans, and some places ordered new arrivals to be quarantined for 40 days. That's literally where the word comes from. Ship cargo was inspected and destroyed if suspicions arose. And what's really extreme, families walled in their own children to isolate them. I mean, we experienced some of these containment measures with COVID. Like, imagine if more than half of the people that got the disease died from it. It would be like this all-consuming issue. And it's what the Red Death draws inspiration from. Unfortunately, though, Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon doesn't take it as seriously as it makes you believe it will from the prologue. So here's what I could glean about the Red Death plague. The Red Death was a disease that infected a powerful magical human. The Fomorians, a race of sea giants, studied this human and used the Red Death as a biological weapon against the Firbolgs, earth giants. Sea creatures were immune to it. Fearing it being used against humans, Merlin sought to buy a sample and study it to get ahead of the disease. Rats escape his lab, giving origin to the pandemic. The desperation of having death all around, bodies literally piling up, plus visions of a better land that was free of the disease, led to a mass exodus to Avalon. Little did people know, an exodus isn't really a cure for a pandemic. Incubation time is not explicitly given, but I'm under the impression that it is short from talking to the Red Priest trader in the asylum. His tone makes it seem like he'll start showing symptoms soon.
They threw me into a cell that once held a patient in the final stages of the disease. I'm probably sick already. Go. Don't worry about me. I'm not worth it.
We know that infection can be asymptomatic because it's most contagious just as symptoms are starting to show. The CFR, case fatality rate, isn't precisely known either, but it is very high. The disease progresses to organ failure, leading to death. Some survivors have a good chance of becoming husks, which are basically zombies, but better looking. The mass exodus to Avalon also implies high fatality, and the game's prologue certainly makes it seem like it was as bad as the Black Death. Human-to-human transmission. There's no clear evidence here, but it's likely as high, if not higher than COVID, because coughing is one of the early symptoms, and it's highly contagious early. But it's probably not as high as measles, which has an R0 of 12 to 18. Measles, ridiculous. Vector reservoir amplification appears to be high too. The origin is tied to rats escaping Merlin's lab, so clearly rats can be hosts. There's no mention of a vector like fleas, and there are a number of experiments being done to animals in the asylum. Again, there's no real smoking gun here, but the circumstances point to this being high. I feel like the plague that led to the exodus wouldn't be as catastrophic without high amplification. Unfortunately, the game doesn't do a good job design-wise after the prologue, and I don't remember seeing rats anywhere, but hey, maybe you did. Not seeing rats would be evidence against the rat reservoir. Transmission ease now. It appears to be both respiratory via aerosolized droplets and via contact with the blood of the victim. It isn't clear if that contaminated blood can affect via the skin or if it needs access to the bloodstream. Symptoms are pretty bad. The Red Death is described as having 6 different stages. Stage 1 is almost asymptomatic, but symptoms start to show as burning sensation on the skin, cough, reddened skin, or body aches. Stages 2 to 4 carry the same symptoms, but they increase in intensity. Those are fever, weakness, burning sensations, red spores, blotched skin, tooth loss, festering wounds, cracked skin, and mental instability, paranoia, and delirium. Stage 5 comes with internal intense burning, organ failure, mental breakdown, violent outbursts, and catatonic behavior. And then stage 6 is a full mutation. The victim turns into that zombie-like husk, provided they're still alive. It sounds cool, but the game does a horrible job of showing these stages, and as a designer, I'm a little disappointed. There are really only 2 models for Red Death patients, one for females and the other for males. That's why they all look the same. None of them have hair, but hair loss is not listed as a symptom. And we don't hear about Red Priests shaving patients' heads, which would have been a simple lore explanation. Those 2 models They use the same plague textures with the same red lines everywhere. And it doesn't matter if it's stage 2 or 5, it's the same lines, it's the same model, it's the same intensity. It's an on-off switch, really. The only other Red Death models are for stage 6, which is the zombie stage, and for dead bodies. And believe me, I understand that Questline is a small studio and there are budgetary concerns, but making 5 more textures and a few more patient models would have taken like 5 minutes. And the inconsistencies do not end here. Here's Yagin's file. It's stage 3. Well-defined skin lesions with raised borders. And here's Yagin, looking like he could do the Tour de France.
Are you trying to escape, my child? That's very brave of you, I must say.
I guess they forgot to give him the disease model. And meet Daiga. She's the only patient in the asylum other than you that is standing. But her file says she's on stage 5 with severe disability due to nerve damage and muscle atrophy. Like, I think the devs didn't expect me to make a video on this. There are so many mismatches between the notices outside of the cells and what's going on in them. Some kind of personal protective equipment should exist, according to this one. Don't go in without it being enchanted and wear crazy good gloves because the big, bad, ugly rat inside will F you up. But nope, it's got a nice ring though. You could say this dude was just stupid, but are all red priests stupid? They're all wearing the same exact gear. Anyway, mutation rate. This is the one attribute with no real information to go on. Assuming the red death is bacterial, like the black death was, mutation rate is low. And lastly, immunity duration and reinfection. There were a number of experiments being done with the weirdness in the asylum. That's the magical mist or god or force or whatever that covers Avalon, especially at night. It seems that weirdness can make people immune to the plague as long as that weirdness persists in the person's body. If it leaves the body, however, the person can get infected, or an existing dormant infection can resume its course. So here's the spider chart for the Red Death. I would use this chart as a designer to then design the game world. This chart serves as logs for world building. There are so many things that the game world could show to add the sense of doom that this land is living with. You're creating a quest, reference the plague, make sure the characters behave appropriately. Maybe you arrive at a new town, but you have to prove you're immune, or not sick, or you have to go through quarantine. But going through quarantine would be really tough to design, unless you skipped a bunch of time. So in that same conversation, you ask how you could prove that you're immune to the disease. The NPC then says that there has been a murder, but no one wants to investigate it because it happened in an infected zone. You offer to do so. The NPC says something like, okay, well, technically, you could get infected there, and we'd only see it later, but only an idiot would walk into that death trap without immunity, so if you solve this murder, we'll believe you. And bam, you don't have to design a complicated quarantine sequence, and you delivered a quest that makes sense and follows the world building that your pathogen is living in. And hey, while investigating this murder in this cordoned off infected area, maybe you come across a smuggling operation. Smugglers have been using the plague outbreak as cover. You enter several buildings with red crosses painted on them to stop the authorities from entering. They all have illicit goods inside, and bam, you discovered a side quest while on a different quest. You know, the game could have a bunch of random little encounters, like Rockstar is so good at these. As you're exploring the town, you hear a child sneeze behind your character. You flip the camera around and there's a grown man berating this kid. The man thinks this kid is sick and now he's been infected. He wants to kill this kid on the spot. You intervene. The kid tells you that he did exactly like his parents told him. He covered his mouth with his arm and he looked down. He tells you he's not sick. He shows no symptoms other than the one sneeze, but you know there's no way to really tell if he's got it. And you know that if he does have it, then this is the time he's most contagious. Do you take the kid to the authorities? They'll likely throw him in a prison and they'll do the same to his family. And because the angry man claims the kid sneezed near him in a bit of a plot twist, the guards take him away too. It's like, I'm sorry, sir, but if this kid sneezed near you like you said he did, then you also need to be locked away. I can think of so many other examples because having an extinction level plague in the game world is just so damn interesting to me. But the important thing is all of these ideas need to adhere to the chart. But Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon drops the ball here. The game does a good job of creating this atmosphere in the prologue, but then they forget about it later, you know? All we see are a few mentions about outbreaks and the plague in dialogue. There's even an NPC called Carla that apparently cured somebody using weirdness. You do this super short side quest with the dude stuck in a barrel, and then she is forgotten. Like, excuse me, shouldn't we be listening to this bitch? I'll give him a little credit though. There's this small area in the second map with plague doctors, covered bodies, and barred doors with red paint on them. But it's all set dressing. It's insignificant. You can't watch anyone suffering. You talk to this woman who's got like a pig or something. She's not wearing anything. She doesn't care that people are dying around her. Like, come on, man. I just want to be immersed. The Red Death should have been given the same level of importance that it got in the intro throughout the entire game. They made it sound like a main quest, and it ended up becoming an afterthought. And that's the issue here. The only memorable time the plague takes center stage again after the prologue is during the side quest to unlock the Red Death skill. Here's a spoiler warning. You can come back after the spoiler tag disappears if you want to avoid it. During the side quest, you learn that the plague is caused by the lament of a mother for the death of her child. This powerful magical being is grieving, and that grief is causing the plague. She doesn't want to cause it, but she also can't help it. She doesn't know how to stop it. She gave visions of Avalon to Arthur's sister, who guided the people to the new land. His sister then became the prophet of the Red Priests. So after this lore-filled conversation, you are teleported out of this place, and you automatically unlock the Red Death skill tree. And that's 99% of the Red Death content in the game. It would have been heart-wrenching to see like a pale-faced family hugging in the living room of their house with their kids behind a brick wall because the kids were infected with the plague. Like, this shit actually happened during the Black Death. And it really would drive the point that these are terrible, desperate times. But all we really get are a couple more mentions in dialogue. As for a cure, it seems to be tied to the weirdness. That is what the Red Priests were getting at when you killed them. I mean, yeah, sure, they were torturing people, but, you know, they were getting close to the cure, and then you, me, and everybody else, we just fucked things up, so good job, us. Another great cure, it's not going to cure anything, but it will give you a dopamine rush, is if you click that subscribe button. Oh, can you feel it already? The weirdness, or some kind of magic, needs to transform or overtake the body of the infected. In the player's case, that's Arthur. This is nearly confirmed by one of the endings. Spoiler again. You can choose to get rid of the Arthur power that you have. That choice then returns your character to the state that they were in before they got Arthur. You were infected then, and so that infection resumes, eventually killing you.
Without the power of Arthur to sustain you, your body fell back into the endless rot of the Red Death.
Curing a massive pandemic with a magical force isn't as interesting to me as what happened in Europe. The Black Death simply ran its course after nearly 8 years. People believed their god was better because they didn't get sick at first. And then when everyone started dying regardless, they started taking action. Not unlike a medieval version of Plague Inc. The countermeasures worked slowly, but eventually the death stopped. The Black Death was like a giant reset button for Europe. It brought with it the beginning of the end of the feudal system and serfdom. So it wasn't all bad, I guess. Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon is a fun game, especially for Skyrim fans like me, but I see this as a missed opportunity. The Red Death should have always been on our minds as we progressed further in the story. I think it would be so interesting to play a Fall of Avalon prequel, taking place during the peak of the plague, 600 years ago, so that we can really immerse ourselves in that world. And then a sequel where the plague is actually stopped, and we get to see the societal changes that the world is forced to go through on the other side. And here's some bonus trivia. There's actually a Red Death plague in an Edgar Allan Poe short story from 1842 with the same bloodied skin symptom. Coincidence? I don't think so. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, check this other video because YouTube thinks you're gonna love it.